List season is well and truly upon us. We are in the midst of all the fun little lists that I do every single year, and please make sure you are sticking around. If you're new to this channel, you're new to this video, please check out the Patreon as well, as you can support me over there. There is going to be a list of my Discord server's favourite albums of the year coming at some point too, so if you want to get involved in that, you can join the Discord server through Patreon, and then you're going to be a part of that video as well. So please, lots of fun things coming for the rest of December. Make sure you're on board. One of my favourite year-end lists has got to be this one for me. 2020 was the first time I did it, and it occurred to me that there weren't really any other YouTubers or music reviewers or music reviewing channels, etc., whatever you want to label that kind of group, virgins maybe, that didn't really touch on this kind of thing. So when I thought of the idea, I was like, this is really fun. This could make for a really cool series that I do every year, because I'm not just listening to albums from 2022 all year round. I'm listening to all kinds of albums from all kinds of genres, from all kinds of eras that are great and are fantastic and end up being some of my favorite albums ever, depending on how good they are, if I discover them at the right time, etc., you know, all that kind of stuff. So it seems like it's a smart thing to do, to make a separate list for the best albums I've heard in the year of 2022 that came out in another year. So I'd certainly love to see more videos like this from others, but until then, I'll be the one leading the charge, and you can get some new, perhaps totally new albums from me, and there's going to be 10 of them. So let's get straight into it. No particular order, it's just going to be an unordered list of artists that I have discovered this year, or albums by artists that I may have already known that I hadn't heard before, that I've heard this year, that I think are fantastic, great, wonderful, amazing. Starting with Ericdoa, definitely big shout out to Hivemind for this one. I had heard of this artist before, but watching Hivemind's videos this year has been one of my favourite parts of this year overall, to be honest. Discovering their really fun YouTube series that they do with all the kinds of little games that they play, the fun little skits that they come up with, and one of the videos I just so happened to watch, they had picked out this album artwork, and I think they were doing like a ranking of album artwork, and yeah, it kind of got me curious, because I was like, the way they're talking about this album sounds really good, even if the album artwork kind of feels a little bit off. There's something like off-center about it, or something that I can't quite figure out. But it kind of has a bit of a cool, weird energy to it as well. But yeah, listening to the album, I was super impressed. I feel like it was an artist that came at the right time, because of course one of my favourite albums of this year has been Breakance, and Breakance appears on this album too. So it just seemed to line up really, really nicely to discover this album at this time. I find that the hyperpop sensibilities are some of the best I've heard across the entire genre on this album, actually. I have had a bit of a mixed history with hyperpop as a genre overall. I do think there's lots to like about it, and there's been some really good songs, some really good albums that come from hyperpop as a genre, but it's not really one that hits on a regular basis, and I feel like Ericdoa has a really, really charming approach to his style that makes him stand out a little bit more compared to others. He has a bit more of a slick energy about him, the way he kind of comes on these beats. He modulates his vocals and edits that kind of stuff just like you would expect in hype hop, but there are some times where it's not like that, and it just has a really cool energy that's going about it, and I think, yeah, it was a really cool discovery for the year. Gangs of Youth, who are a band that I, again, had been aware of, but this year I delved into some of their albums. They did drop an album this year as well, which was really quite good, but Go Farther Into Lightness was the best album of their bunch that I've heard from them, and a really, really great indie rock album that I was super impressed with in terms of the production, because I feel like there's so much going on these tracks. There's a great energy that comes through as well, that Heartland rock vibe that you'd get from your Bruce Springsteen days of rock music really, really shines through on this, and gives them a real obvious comparison to make to a band called the Gaslight Anthem, who I've always really liked, and I think their 59 Sound album is phenomenal. So anything that reminds me of that is obviously going to be a big win, and it doesn't feel like it's, you know, just ripping off other artists, because I know sometimes bands in this style, particularly at the moment, there's quite a few artists that are coming through that are doing this Heartland rock Bruce Springsteen thing, that can just sound a bit like a pale imitation of it. But I don't think Gang of Youths do that at all. I think there's a real potency to this singer's voice, an emotional earnestness that comes through in a sort of like Jason Isbell way. Like, he could kind of sell some of those slower tracks really well, I think, if he were to do a whole album like it. And yeah, I'm just super impressed with this. Just from a musical standpoint, I think it sounds fantastic, and lyrically I think it's on point too. Vocally it's great. Like, just so much to love about this album. Right, so I made a vow to myself this year that I would hear every Bonobo album before I heard the new one. And I stuck to that vow as well. I listened to every goddamn Bonobo album, Bonobo album before I heard the new one, and Black Sands was a standout album. I think Bonobo generally is ridiculously consistent. Like, there's really no misses in that man's discography. Everything was like teetering on great, but then as soon as I hit Black Sands, I was like, this is the one. This is the great one that I've been sort of waiting for. It was like so close to getting to great every single time, and then you hit that one, and it's just a culmination of the best aspects of Bonobo's music up until that point. There's a great drive to the tracks. The drums particularly sound so crisp across this album. There's some nice little jazzy elements that come through as well. The melodies are super memorable. Like, they really, really stick with you. And yeah, just in terms of what you want from this style of music, it's exactly what it gives you. So I feel like Bonobo, Black Sands, is the epitome of Bonobo's music, and one of the best of its genre as well. Totally different album from a totally different era next. The Dramatics, What You See Is What You Get, and the title track is possibly one of the best funk soul tracks of all time. Like, hearing that this year, I have that much confidence in saying that, despite the fact that I've not been listening to this song for that long, but it is just so bloody good. And if you are an Injury Reserve fan, you'll pick up on a very, very obvious sample as well. Pay attention to this track if you haven't heard it before, because you'll know the song that I'm talking about if you are an Injury Reserve fan. But the rest of the album as well is just so carefree. It's just so spiritually soul. Like, the soulfulness that comes through is really, really infectious. Lyrically, I don't think many of the tracks are particularly anything special, but the fact that this singer has such a great voice and really sells the lyrics in the way that he does, and often soul music can be more about that anyway than the lyrics themselves. It's just everything that you want for the genre. And there's a funky vibe coming through as well. Yeah, it's good. Moving over to the classier side of soul next, I discovered Roberta Flack's Feel Like Making Love this year, an artist that I certainly hadn't heard of for the first time this year. I am, of course, aware of Roberta Flack. Of course, some amazing classic songs that have been covered to death, like Killing Me Softly. Obviously, come on, man, what a famous song that is. But I'd never actually checked out some of her albums in full before. I think I'd heard one of hers before this one, but this one I was like, let's try the whole thing. I'm in a soul mood this year, and seriously did not disappoint. Just amazing vocals, the richness coming through, the production is super on point as well. It does not sound like it's aged a day really. And yeah, I think when you have a voice or a vocal, I think I was trying to say there, but it came together in one. When you have a vocal as strong as Roberta Flack, like, it really carries the songs in a sort of Aretha Franklin way as well. Like, it can just take you on board immediately just through that tone, the vocal tone. It's sensational hearing her. There's a bit of a sensualness coming through on these tracks as well. Yeah. So glad I checked this one out this year. It's one of the best albums of its kind. Going to the modern day, the complete opposite end of all the scales that we've had so far, we're going into some trap, and we're going to go with Sharc and Pierre Bourne. Now, Pierre Bourne is an artist that I absolutely fell in love with last year through his The Life of Pierre 5 album. You know, it is one of my albums of the year for 2021. If you keep up with the channel, you'd know how high it was on that list. And I've just been kind of curious to try more of his stuff that he's been producing, or he's been working with other artists. And Sharc and Pierre Bourne with 47 Meters Down was an album that I did discover and ended up finding out that it is pretty damn great, and one of the most underrated trap albums out there, I think. It's only pretty recent, it's not exactly an old album, But in terms of what it brings to the table, the flows that Sharc has, and just the beats as well, the beat selection from Pierre is always sensational. You would just expect it to be more in the conversation, and yet it doesn't really get brought up by trap fans as often as some of the other trap albums. So yeah, a bit of an underrated one for you here as well. A total unsung hero of pop music, my friends here. Paula Abdul with Spellbound. Like, really good stuff from this album. The title track, Rush Rush, and probably one of the best dancey pop tunes of the 80s, or maybe even of all time, with Vibology. Like, Vibology, bro? Oh, please, if you've never heard that song, play that song, and I dare you to not dance, because you are going to dance to that banger. It is so good. The horns come through, the production sounds great. Paula Abdul has so much charisma. Like, I just don't understand why she doesn't get talked about, or didn't have the success of some of her 80s counterparts, because there is some sensational stuff coming out of this album that I just think absolutely deserved the love that it never really got. But yeah, Paula Abdul, again, bit of an underrated one here as well, but I just wanted to include it for that reason, because there's so much to say about her as an artist, and she brought so much to the table in the pop music world, and R&B as well, and doesn't get talked about anymore. It's sad to see. On my trip to London, I got into a conversation about Caribou, and I was saying I wasn't really ever the biggest fan of Caribou generally, but thankfully I was pointed in the direction by Josh, Ben and Camden to check out Manitoba, which is the early name, pseudonym sort of name thing for Caribou. You know what I'm trying to say. Of course, he does change his name up quite a bit as well. Daphne dropped an album this year, was actually really good. So I was pointed in the direction of trying some Manitoba, and yeah, Stop Breaking My Heart is probably the best thing Caribou has ever done. Under all the names that he has, this is so good. It's got that quartet vibe to it. It's got that kind of like glitchy, sort of jazzy IDM sort of sound that really lingers through, and some of the beats just sound fantastic. Like, so good. It really hasn't aged today, despite the fact that it's over 20 years old now. And the fact that Caribou's still going under different names and putting out music under the Caribou name and dropping some real heating bangers. Like, some of the tracks from that Daphne album were great. Some of the tracks from the 2019 album, was it? Or 2020 album, I think. Either or, were great as well. So yeah, even all these years later, he's still putting out some really good tunes. But the best of the bunch might be from 2001. Great album, this one. They have appeared in a video that I've done already this year for Essential Funk Albums. I've really accelerated through their discography this year and heard loads of their albums. It had to be brought up, the Isley Brothers. And the one I wanted to pick was 3 Add 3, mostly because that first track has a really famous sample that's used in a rap song. Of course, That Lady, by which becomes I by Kendrick Lamar. Like, you will recognize samples when you hear any Isley Brothers album, and this one is no different. They have been sampled to death by rappers over the years because their music is just so eternal. Like, everything about their music is just absolutely lifelong. Yes, whatever the hell that means. They are everlasting. Their music is so good. It is so bloody good. It's frustrating how good they are, because every album you hear, you're like, how did they do it again? And how did they do it again? Ronald Isley, one of the best soul singers, one of the best funk singers of all time as well. Kind of feel a bit underrated too. Like, whenever you think of this genre, no one really says Isley Brothers as the first one that you'd point to when you're thinking of soul music. They're not the first name on the tip of people's tongues. But they should be. They really should be. They have not missed ever in their time. And yeah, I've loved listening to them this year. They've been such an absolute 2022 treat for me. And had to end on probably the biggest 2022 treat for me. Probably because talking to my friends in real life, John and Ben, about Kylie Minogue throughout the year, because they're massive fans of Kylie too. It's kind of, I guess, pushed me or kind of encouraged me to also be listening to her music as well. I've always been a massive fan of her, by the way, but I've just gotten way more into her. And her self-titled album, Kylie Minogue, from the mid-90s, again, I'm using this word, but might be the most underrated album of her whole discography. She has some bangers, she has some classics, she has some amazing singles, but in terms of just going for something quite different in her discography, This one really holds up, and I'm super impressed by the length of the tracks, the fact that some of the tracks go in a bit more of a house dance direction that really suits her, some R&B sensual stuff as well. Yeah, I've had a great time with Kylie this year. I'm discussing her with my friends. She's one of the goats in pop music, like seriously could be the goat of pop music when you think about the longevity. I mean, she's been going since the 80s and she's putting out music today, and the consistency is insane. And yeah, she's been a big part of 2022 for me. Whenever I just want to listen to some fun, dancey pop music, she's the go-to. Every single time I'm just like, I'll stick on some Kylie. And going through her discography and finding out this absolute undiscovered gem of her catalogue as well in the self-titled album had to be mentioned in this video because it's so good. And honestly, you could try any of her albums if you never have, and I think you'll have a great time. So that's it. That is it. Thank you for watching as always. I have done 10. Well, I'm just checking my list to make sure I definitely did 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 albums that I discovered this year that didn't come out this year that you should check out. And they have been great discoveries at that as well. Thank you for watching. Tell me your discoveries of the year. If you've heard any of these 10 albums, please tell me what you think of them. If you agree with me, disagree, tell me what I should be checking out as well for future other undiscovered gems videos or future classic review videos. If there's great albums out there that I haven't mentioned in this video that I should check out, tell me what you've discovered this year. I've already said that. Have a good day, subscribe, and goodbye.